start now anyway because it's 2 o'clock and I know everyone's pretty busy. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll make this a presentation. So, a moment. There you go. Okay, so welcome this afternoon to Webi and IDT tips. Basically, what I'll do today is obviously welcome you, and I'll just briefly say a little bit about myself, but then I'll move into talking about the information design tool. What I'll do is actually go on and quickly just show you setting up a new, very quick universe. Obviously, different people are on different knowledge. So if people are new to the information design tool, then hopefully it'll just give them a little flavour of what to do. But obviously a few other people are probably a little bit further down the line and they just need some best practices really, and tips and kind of useful little areas which I think would be quite useful and obviously can then be passed on to the business users. Following that is obviously a similar kind of concept, but with web intelligence. So going over best practices. Then what I'll also do is use some of the new functionality which is in the latest BI 4.1 version of Web Intelligence Business Objects. It adds extra little bits of fancy stuff, really. Similar to kind of Excel, where you can freeze panes and everything. Obviously, not everyone can be using that, but it's quite a nice thing to have, and little things dropping by every now and again to actually extra functionality, as it were. But first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Rob Parker. I've got probably, I would say, approaching 15 years worth of predominantly web intelligence usage and information design tool and designer previous to that. I historically have come from an end user aspect, so I used to work for a company called I can say Smith's News, which is like a newspaper and magazine wholesaler, and initially I was an end user, but then started moving from marketing team into the more technical roles where I was setting up and selling a service to our publishers and retailers, and then further back still, starting creating some of the universes and the reporting and the back end kind of aspect of it. I then moved to intelligence and worked within the presentation layer, so using Web Intelligence Crystal, dashboards, and then recently I've had 2 babies, so I've then moved away from being out and about and is more working within the support area, working with the guys in Glasgow. I know some of the people on are actually got maintenance contracts with ourselves, so I do recognise a few of the names listed in here, and obviously working in the support role, so if anyone has got any problems with their systems, how-to questions and the like, we get fielded through there to ourselves and to the field team as well. So what I'll do is I'll start it, and what I'll first of all do is go into the information design tool, because that is where the start is. Okay, so what I've got here is the information design tool for our it's just basically a VM running the client tools. So what I've got is what I produce is everything's run in a project. So you create a project, and I just call it webinar. And then within the project, you the information design tool and the UNX universe which it creates is basically made up of 3 areas. Those 3 areas have all got their own best practices and little tips here and there, so which I'll talk about later. But initially, it's you right-click, you can then create a relational connection. I'll do it in this instance, and then I'll just call that webinar again. I think I might have used that earlier, and then click next. What type of database middleware you're using. What I'll mention later on is also the fact that as part of my role, I see a lot of calls coming in based on, is this a supported database on different versions of business objects, and I'll give you a link to that area to actually. Then you can check yourselves to see whether like SQL 2014 is a supported version. What I'm running here is BI4.1, and the latest, I believe it's the latest service pack on this one. So what I'll do is I'll create an OpenDPC driver, and I've already got a data source created here. So just put in my database credentials and then click test connection, and I've got a connection here. So click next. The parameters here I'll talk about in a bit, but it also predominantly the first 2, the pull timeout and the array fetch size, those 2 are areas where you could probably tweak and optimize to get the best out of your connection and your universe. You click next here and then just finish. So ignore this. These should be deleted. Okay, so I've now got the connection. If you wanted to publish it up to the repository, you just right-click and then publish connection to the repository, and a shortcut connection will then appear in your local project. I won't do that here. What I'll do is just keep everything local. So if I right-click and then say New Data Foundation, and then call it Webinar 1 again, and then all the different connections within that database will appear. Sorry, all the tables in that database will appear, and then this side of the screen, you can then start adding your tables to create a database data foundation layer. So what I'll do is open sales, locate the salesperson, the sales history, sales territory, and then I'll open up the HR and locate the employee table. So what you'll then see is these are the tables within the database, and then you just want to very quick, it's a very small data foundation, so you can then join. So each table is joined based on a commonality. So the salesperson here is business identity ID. You can create a join quickly. I won't show you, all the ins and outs of creating universes, because would be here all day, but it's quite useful starting point, as it were, just to lay the foundation, really. This here, you've got a join, but you need to know the cardinality between the two tables. So this salesperson here, and then you've got an employee. So you've probably got one employee could appear many times in this table. So you could click on detect, which I do here, but I'm expecting N and 1 on this side. So there you go. Okay, I do the same again. It's territory ID, drag across, and then just click detect. And okay. So a very, very simple data foundation, but it can be as complicated and as simple as that, really. So if I save this, and then if I right click and then create a business layer. So this is the layer which kind of the database kind of guys and the back end kind of people would know the ins and outs of. The business layer is what you're building the universe for. Obviously, universes are created for a particular reason, and that is to give people access to data in an easy format in a universe, which they can have understanding of. The objects listed are actually make sense to them, and they can then create their own. What I did there was actually created a business layer, but I left the tick on to say create objects for every single column within the tables. So you see here there's 3 tables in the data foundation. Business layer has now got 3 different folders, as it were. So the salesperson here and all the table, every column here is listed in this area here. And if I then, that's created. So that's this very simple universe. You can then publish that up, and then you'd be able to use it in Web Intelligence and other applications such as Crystal, data, dashboards, even Lumira, Explorer. It's just really where you've created, I mean, it's not so much here, but you can create a semantic layer which is which is easy for people to use if they've got Web Intelligence experience. So what I'll now do is just go back into my presentation and just go over some of the areas where we can get best practices and some tips, really, to see how successfully you can build a universe. So the first of all, as part of my role within support, we get quite a few calls based mainly around ODBCs and the whole 32-bit and 64-bit systems. So what you've got is you have BI4 introduced everything mostly on a 64-bit. Now 4.1 mostly on 64-bit, but there's some 32-bit functionality and applications still which are in evidence. First of all, this Crystal Report Designer, also all the client tools such as even the information design tool and obviously Designer. What else is there? Rich Client. They're all listed under the 32-bit version. So What there is that you can create everything within the IDT under under a 32-bit ODBC. However, once you push that up to the repository, you may have issues with connectivity, reports running, because you haven't set up a 64-bit ODBC as well. What I would say is best practice really would be, and what I used to always do, is as soon as you start having you setting up connections, it's probably always worth setting up both in 32-bit and 64-bit. That way you've got a catch-all situation really, where you, people, if they want to run it in the BI Launchpad and also in the rich client on local PCs, then just make sure that the ODBCs are set up either in both or the specific places. The same goes for Oracle as well. It's probably worth always installing both the 32-bit and the 64-bit, plus add in the identical config files as well, the TNS names file. That's kind of a best practice we kind of find, and we regularly point people down that route in some of the support calls we receive. The PAM document, which is the what's it called? The matrix. So it gives you a list of the data sources which are supported for each of the versions. So what I would do is I'll click through to here. I'll probably be able to put this presentation available for everyone to use on the website, or maybe email to the people who attend, I guess. But product availability matrix here, you can click through. It's quite a convoluted way of actually getting to it, unfortunately, because I believe SAP have moved things around. And so what I'd do is I will open up the platform 4.1, and then it will download, open a new window. What I did earlier is one earlier, so I will open that one. Okay, I'll open one which downloaded a little time ago. So here, this is the platform support document for BI 4.1. All the other service packs, all the service packs are listed in this 4.1 document. Older versions of XI3.1 and 4.0 had their own specific document, but this is from release to market to SP5, which is the latest service pack we have. So going through, it's got a list of different supported browsers you've got, but also where is it? Here you go. So the types of database you may have, so Oracle, 11G, then you have SQL Server and the likes. So if you have a Windows Server, then you can use SQL Server 2014 from Service Pack 4 onwards. That's quite a very useful document, especially when you're setting up your system in the first place. It'll help make sure that you're on supported platform, through ourselves and SAP. If you're not on support, sometimes SAP would then say, well, you're not on support, please update your database or go back to a supported platform. So these are quite useful sources of information, really. Okay, in terms of the IDT in general, it's worthwhile knowing the real reason why you're creating a universe. It's really for business users and end users to get access to the data. So it's always worthwhile involving them from the start. You know, there's no point building a universe which no one's going to use, or it serves half the purpose. So always worth involving them from the outset. Also, if you have a data maintenance team, then it's always useful to involve them as well, because they can give you, what each of the columns and what each of the objects refers to, and also give you some standard naming as well. So adopting standards is the main one, really. Is you have a name of a universe object, so you could have customer number in one universe, but that same object in another universe may be called customer no or customer. So when you start merging within Web Intelligence, it doesn't always understand that, so it makes it harder for the end user. Commonality really with folder names and list of value names, it's always worth standardizing across the piece, and then you won't get many phone calls and queries just to say, is that? Okay, next. So in terms of the information design tool and building the universe, what I'm going to go through now is each of the different areas. So you've got connections here. So there's connections, data foundation, and business layer. So the connections, when I created this connections page, there was parameters you could use. Now, under the parameter change, you can change some of the parameters, such as the pull timeout. Now, the pull timeout is kind of specifies the length of time to keep the connection open. So that connection will remain open until the set time. It also, if you hit that connection again, then it will reset the timer. The pull, that's the pull timeout. The array fetch size is another area where you could focus on. Is the array fetch size defines the amount of rows which you're going to return from each data fetch. So say you had 100 rows which need to be fetched, then if you use the array fetch size of 10, then it's going to have to go back 10 times as a fetch to actually bring back those rows. So you would say that the higher the value of the array fetch size, the faster the query runs. Adverse to that is really it actually then takes up more memory, because it has to then transfer a lot more data across in a fetch. So if you have large amounts of information of data, it may be worth trying to optimize it as best you can, rather than just the default figure, just to tweak it slightly, and you may get increased performance that way. Okay, the last part of this is really connections. I mean, when I created the universe earlier, I just used a single source. However, there's multiple sources you can use as well, so you can create a universe based on many different sources. So it could be an SAP source, it could be a SQL Server database source, or it could be the likes of an Excel file could be used, or a text file. All those different sources could be created into one universe. Now, previous to BI 4.0, you never had that ability. You could only really use one source for one universe, whereas now you can create multi-source universes and it will run the same way. Okay. So now move on to the data foundation. Data foundation is where the much of the work gets done in the information design tool to improve performance of your universe and the queries you set it to run off. Then it's always worth trying to limit the amount of joins, because each join would then mean that you have to go through another table, and each time you have to go through a different table, it means that the performance decreases. So if you had like a common object in each of the tables, then you could then join on that one and then go directly to it. If you have to go through a different table to then get the join, then that's where the performance aspect comes into it. Alternatively, I mean, if you already know the types of queries which are going to be showing and being pulled, then you could always speak to your database administrators and get them to put all the data in the same table, depending on how it's already set up. You could get them to create a view, and then everything gets created in one table, and that would then increase performance that way. Another area you could look, to take into account is make sure you've got the correct join type. You can, depending really on what you're wanting to show, is I mean, standard joins really are bring back results if the row is in both of the tables. However, the likes of outer joins, you could then say, well, bring back the results regardless of whether it's in this table. So it's kind of really knowing what your business users will need, and I'll probably keep harping back to it. It's like they're the end users at the end of the day, and you may need an outer join, or you may need standard join. Shortcut joins, that's kind of would probably increase performance rather than going through many different tables to get to the end result. You could then create maybe a table, a shortcut join, which isn't a join, a standard join. It's like it always use that shortcut if it's available. Shortcut joins also help with like resolving loops. So loops are obviously where you get a visible loop where you all the tables could potentially be joined to each other, and obviously then when you run it, it will then spiral out of control. To resolve those loops, you either remove those unnecessary joins if you don't need them in there, or you can create a context based on certain aspects. So a context is where you have the certain types of certain joins within your tables relate to, say, customer sales, whereas other joins within your data foundation relate to supplier sales. So making sure that if you create a context, it won't then join, it won't then create this loop. Another one is creating an alias table. So you can create an alias table, many alias tables, such as a time dimension table. You may have a standard time dimension table which gets used across everywhere. So you have like a table, a sales date table, you could have a modified date table, you could have any sort of any type of table, or using the underlying same date column, date time table, but it'd be creating an alias of that to make sure that you have each of those tables that could then create their own set of objects within the universe. Derived tables, so rather than creating joins and between certain tables, you could then derive them, so you could create a derived table based on a number of different tables which you have within the universe. Creating a derived table obviously would speed up your processing and produce better results. It kind of pushes the calculations back to the database layer rather than the report or universe layer. I'll probably mention later on within the Webi area that it's worthwhile, if you know any standard calculations which you use on an everyday basis, which are derived from their own calculations. So going back to when I was working at Smiths News, supply minus returns equals sales, then you could create a sales calculation using in the universe layer or in the derived table, so that it won't always try to calculate that net sales figure. So as I said, create everyday calculations in the data foundation rather than the report layer. Other areas to check really would be the SQL options in the data foundation. Now when I created the data foundation, if I go back into the second, go back, where's my table? Apologies for this a second. Just try and find within the data foundation area, you have options where you can, why is this not working? A second. Okay, so you can check the SQL options here. So you can allow for Cartesian products, so if there's no joins, if the joins aren't present, then it will allow reports to still be run. Obviously, if you tick this, then you may get inflated results, because if there's no joins, it doesn't actually understand what the relationship is, so it will bring back results for everything, everything against everything. Multiple SQL statements for each context. Now this is where you can create a query that contains different contexts. So when I mentioned previously, you could have a customer sales and a supplier sales context. Well, what this tick here allow you to put everything in one context, in one query, but what will happen is that the universe will understand that and create separate SQL statements for each context. So it will, when you go, what you could potentially do is go into the SQL of the query and find out that it's actually split. So it splits different select statements according to the context you're in. Okay, just go back. Finally, the use of families. Now this is quite a nice little tool where you can illustrate common tables in the data foundation through different color schemes. So what I'll probably show you here show you here is that you can use this families area here. So say you had this salesperson and this employee here, then you click on family, edit family. You can add different, so this table color would be white, add, and that one would be that. You can give that the, sorry, it's just going through, so add that in there. So you can then, should be then be able to, what should happen is, I'm probably doing this slightly wrong here, I guess, but if you can add a new family, it should list it here if I'm doing it correctly, and then you can then give them different color schemes. So different color schemes can then pick up there and there to say that those two are people tables. Then you can create the different color scheme based on multiple different connections. So it make it easier for you to then say, you know, as a administrator, that those tables are linked in some way. Okay. Finally, the business layer. Now, tips here really would be to make sure that the business layer, you always set aggregation and projection for measures. So when you're creating a calculation, then you make sure, say if it's a measure object, to always make sure that that is, say, set with an aggregation of a sum. So that creates, when you then add those together, it won't affect your business, your reports. In terms of projection as well, if those haven't got anything set, then the projection will then always, you can set the projection to always equal to sum as well, and then that will always add those measures together. Index awareness. Index awareness, then say you have an account manager name, then the account manager name is obviously aligned probably to an account manager number in the background. Then you can create a primary key based on that account manager to say, well, the primary key for the account manager would be the account number, and then that way using index awareness actually makes sure that it actually runs more efficiently, because within the SQL element of it, it understands the link between the two, whereas the account manager then needs to understand what the account manager relates to, or the account manager relates to this customer number, and then runs the queries. So make use of index awareness. Primary and foreign keys is always quite a useful tool. Aggregate awareness. Now, aggregate awareness really is useful when you're running very aggregated results. So say you have a top level where you have top level sales for a bunch of customers, and underneath that you have lower level lower level row level figures. Well, if you have aggregate tables, if those tables are actually created and updated regularly, then you could then set aggregate awareness to make sure that if you run these set of criteria, then try the aggregate tables first of all before going to the lower row level tables. It gives a much faster response in terms of queries that way. Finally, one of the things which we always, many times we get queries on, is that it's only bringing back partial results when I run a report. So there's checks where you can in settings where you can limit the amount of rows getting brought back and the execution time. So the execution time, I think, is defaults to like 10 minutes. So if you wanted to get that to run for longer, say if you're running it or your database isn't tuned brilliantly, so it may take a little while to run a report, then this execution time, you can set that or you can turn it off. In terms of row restrictions, you can restrict the amount of rows being brought back, whether you can use union queries or subqueries. It's really different areas, and obviously those limits are actually very often the cause of some of the calls we get. Finally, the query tool, so very useful once you set up the business layer, is to test it using some of the functionality in the IDT. So the querying tool is very useful prior to you publishing the universe. Say if you publish the universe and you haven't put the security against it, then everyone can run this universe and get all sorts of funny figures if it hasn't been tested properly. So as an administrator and a creator of a universe, it's very useful to have this querying tool. Finally, documenting the universe. Within the universe, you can actually have you can pull information back based on the business layer, the data foundation layer, and what I can do quickly is show you where to go to get that. So what there is there's a save as function. So you can right click on here and then go save as, and it will give you information based on general information, context of your data foundation. Similar way you can do it for the business layer and do save as, and it gives you a list of everything which is there. It could be quite useful, especially when you have some users who want to know where certain objects come from. Finally, if you wanted to know more about the information design tool, obviously there's courses around by iTelligence which can give you the tools so you can create it yourselves, or again there's some tutorials online on the SCN which may help you. Just realizing that I'm rambling a little. Sorry about that. So in terms of web intelligence best practices, this all revolves around best practices. It's kind of limiting the data you're bringing back and limiting the amount of data providers you have. The more data providers you have, then the longer it will take. Data providers run sequentially, so obviously if one's running for 10 minutes and another one's going to run for 10 minutes, then it's not going to just run for 10 minutes, it's going to run for 20. So if you can reduce the amount of data providers you've got, that's one area to look at. Then bring back only what's needed. Is the object you're bringing back in the query actually used or not? Is it needed? I've seen many reports where you could be bringing back 1 million rows worth of data, which is it's not efficient when you're trying to use web intelligence. It's a querying tool as opposed to an ETL tool at the end of the day. Obviously, I know that sometimes you do need to bring these rows back to actually then aggregate it, but the smaller the amount of retrievals and the smaller amount of rows you bring back, then the faster the runtime is. There are a number of reports I've seen where you have multiple tabs along the bottom of the report to say, you know, top level, middle level, row level. Now, is that necessary? Could you use OpenDoc? So a user might just want to know the top level figure. So could you just create a report with high level figures and then use the OpenDoc, which is like a hyperlinking kind of functionality, to drill down the parameters and pass those parameters through to get to the middle level, which is and then following that you could then click on a particular bad sale, as it were, and then click on that and then open another report. Using OpenDoc can it will help you because at top level certain users may only want to see that, but then and it's up to them really then to drill through. As well as the OpenDoc, you could also get certain criteria run on the lower level reports, so you always open the latest instance of a schedule on the lower level reports. As I mentioned previously, if you retrieve aggregated data rather than aggregating the report, obviously bring back less rows and be more efficient. Some other areas you may look at is obviously Web Intelligence uses a caching facility. So if the information's been run previously or recently, then you could then use the caching and it opens up that data a lot quicker. Now, you could accidentally disable the cache by using certain functions such as current date, username, current time, stuff which needs to be run at that particular time or against that user. So if it's been run previously, then the likes of these functions will affect it and have to be run again. Avoid autofit. Now, it's very useful to have autofit because it expands the column widths and the heights of the rows, so you don't have to play around with it. But having autofit means that the document has to be rendered each time. So if you refresh it, then it has to go through this navigation, this sort of rendering process. When you click through to reports, different tabs on the report will also mean that you are bringing more time and more complexity into the report. Use of scope of analysis. Obviously, it's useful for a drilling down between figures, but at the same time as drilling down, it brings that data back initially into the cube. So are you actually necessarily wanting to do that? Most of the time are users just looking at the top level figure, or do they actually use this drill down? If they use the drill down, could they use OpenDoc instead, or could they then use there is a preference within Web Intelligence that allows you to be prompted if it needs to be drilled down further and actually say, do you want to go ahead and run this data? So another area to think about there. Finally, the calculations. There's a number of calculations or formatting of a Web Intelligence report, which is deemed less efficient than other ways of doing it. So using sections within sections. So say you have like one section, then you have a subsection within that and another subsection within that. Each time you use that, it then has to go off and understand what needs to be shown on screen at a time. So obviously that can affect the timings of bringing back your results. If you reduce the use of some of the report context, calculation context, like for each and for all, and use in instead, this for each and for all, and the one underneath the use if then else rather than where. Those two are actually have been mentioned in the SAP to actually say that they're less efficient than the other. So if you use in, which can be in within a calculation context, it can bring back exactly the same results as a for each and for all. The factorizing and breaking down the number of steps in a calculation, and this kind of refers to, say you have A plus B is equal to, or ignore that, say had like supply minus returns equals sales, then rather than bringing that calculation back into the report layer to say supply minus returns equals net sales, you can create a calculation of that. And then if you wanted to then say net sales multiplied by the price equals net value, then rather than using the longer calculation to say supply minus returns times by the price, then you could say net sales times by the price. Now factorizing makes use of additional variables you've created, but also it's more efficient, and also it's easier for people to pick up where you've actually what you've actually done within the report, rather than having to decipher the calculation in its entirety. Use of query filters rather than report filters obviously would reduce the amount of data being brought back in the results. Query stripping. Now, query stripping is quite useful. It's actually a new feature which is in from BI 4.1 Service Pack 3 onwards. Now, query stripping looks at what's being run and then sees is it actually being used or not. And it kind of removes any unused objects from a query automatically. So say you have 6 measures and only 4 of them are being used in the report, then if you then check the SQL of the query, it will only have those 4 objects in the SQL, and remove the 2 which aren't being used. Now it needs to be turned on based in the universe layer, the report layer, and the query layer, but it's a very useful tool, I think. Only merge dimensions when required. Merging dimensions obviously is needed if you have multiple queries, but if you have many dimensions which don't necessarily need to be merged, then each merging of the dimension can add processing. If you push calculations to the database or universe layer rather than the report layer, then it's obviously more efficient, which I mentioned previously. And then finally, scheduling. Scheduling is scheduling publications rather than sitting there waiting for an 8 timer to run. You can move reports being run to the early hours of the evening when it's a lot quieter. So it will be yeah, it's a lot quieter, then it's more efficient, and the report will be there when they get back. Okay, finally, sorry, I was just seeing where we are. Finally, I wanted to just mention a few areas where it's quite useful stuff which is being brought into the later versions of the web intelligence. So certain areas that are around scroll freeze pane option, that's acting like Excel, where you can freeze the header row, and then if it's in view mode, you can then scroll down, and then that header will always be there. If that's not an option, if you just use the Java version, but for consumers of the report, so they get sent a report to their inbox every morning, then they could make use of that. Okay. Just seeing I've got a few questions, so what I'll do is I will answer those when the session's closed, because I know I need to wrap up very soon. So what I'll do is I'll answer those after the session's finished. Okay, thank you. I just briefly mentioned a couple of these. The viewing and modifying options. We've had a number of calls in support recently saying that certain functionalities aren't there if you just use the viewing HTML mode. Stuff like conditional formatting and the number formatting is not available. There's a link here which actually lists all the different restrictions, different viewing options, and then sees what you've actually got available to you, that's quite a useful link there. Multiple queries, obviously you can always duplicate multiple queries, the queries itself. In terms of merging, recently it's been added that you can actually, back in 4.0 and XI3.1, you would have had to, if you added a new query into the report, then you would have had to unmerge everything and then remerge the dimension, and then lose everything you previously had set up against the merged dimension. What you can now do, if you've introduced a new query into the report, you can then add to a merged dimension. It's only a small change, but if you're using it every day in, day out, it's one of the pet annoyances that people may have. That's from 4.1 onwards. You have this ability to go into that and then merge dimensions together and add to the merge. Obviously, filter bar and input controls are useful if you're using the report to interrogate it. If you bring back a lot of data back to the cube, you can then use these input controls and filter bars. Custom sorts. Sorting now, you can actually have where you can sort and add in rows where there's no data at the moment. So you have like a list of the list of what's there, and it hasn't been brought back to the cube. Then you can add in additional namings to be then sorted into the right order. Relative positioning is one thing which I actually is probably one of the saviors, rather than having to like edge it left, right, trying to line everything up. Relative positioning, you can say, bring back, put this table 5 pixels below this table, and it'll always be relative to each other. So once you move one thing, you can all the others will move around for you. Sorry, the web intelligence bit has kind of been a bit rushed. Appreciate the timings. Another couple of areas, the formula assistance. If you're creating a document and you need help on formulas, there is a Web Intelligence formulas document. If you follow the link here, then identify which version you have, and then what you can then do is then select that and then find what formula, what formula. And if you need assistance on things like what the formula refers to, so like what does equals first mean, what does equals last mean, it'll give you examples and also details of what the actual formula is doing. Again, tutorials and training is available on the website there. Okay, that's kind of wrapping things up now. What I will do is I see a few questions, which I will pick up. Maybe I can pick up offline. Maybe if I can keep the answers and then respond. I have your emails as part of the webinar, so maybe I could respond offline with those, because there are a number. Okay, cool. So that kind of concludes the webinar as it is at the moment. I say I will respond to those questions offline. So thank you for your time. Apologies for the overrunning slightly of the webinar, but thank you for your time. And if there's any other